3 days ago, they fired her. Today, he discovered the truth. She wasn't an employee. She was the owner of everything, and he lost everything. Never underestimate the person you can't see. 200 employees watched the scene unfold. Cold fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Giant screens flickered with frozen PowerPoint slides. A quarterly presentation interrupted by the CEO's cutting voice. Henrik Valerius turned toward Astrid Lindberg, pointing at her like someone pointing at a stain on the wall. "You've embarrassed this company. You're fired. Effective immediately." Muffled laughter rippled through the crowd. Pitying glances. Director Claudine shook her head in contempt, murmuring loud enough for those nearby to hear. "We always knew she couldn't handle the pressure." Astrid didn't argue, didn't ask for explanations. She simply gathered the thin folder from the table and walked toward the exit while security guards stepped aside as if she were a threat, when in reality, she was merely invisible. Or, that's what everyone thought. That same afternoon, arriving home, Astrid found a man waiting for her. Grey suit, military posture, serious expression. He called her by the surname she never used. "Fräulein Valerius, it's time you knew who you really are." And when he handed her the sealed envelope, her entire life and their empire began to crumble. Astrid Lindberg had always been the shadow in Valerius group meetings. She arrived early, left late, delivered impeccable reports, but none of it mattered. To the board, she was just the distracted analyst and the one with the clipboard and the one nobody remembers. And behind that indifference lay something even crueler, the pride of ignoring her. But Astrid learned early to stay quiet. Her mother always said, "Sometimes silence is armor," and Astrid wore that armor for years, until the day she was humiliated and torn down in front of the entire company for a mistake she didn't make. Being publicly fired should have been the end, but it was only the beginning, because that night she discovered that the company's founder, Matthias Valerius, wasn't just her father. He had left everything to her, not as a reward, as reparation. The true heiress fell before everyone. Now she would rise above them all. The annual shareholder meeting occupied the entire 20th floor of the Valerius Group headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Chicago, the skyline glittering with ambition and steel. Inside, 200 employees, investors, and executives filled the auditorium-style conference room, their faces illuminated by the glow of laptops and smartphones. Astrid Lindberg sat in the third row from the back, exactly where she always sat. Not because the seats were assigned, but because 7 years of working here had taught her that invisibility was survival. She wore a navy blazer, sensible flats, minimal makeup. Her brown hair pulled into a neat bun, professional, forgettable, safe. Around her, conversations buzzed with nervous energy. The quarterly earnings were about to be announced, and rumors had circulated for weeks that the numbers weren't good. Supply chain disruptions, a failed product launch in Europe, mounting legal fees from a lawsuit nobody wanted to discuss openly. Astrid had worked on those projections, late nights, weekend hours. She'd flagged 3 critical errors in the data models submitted by the senior analytics team, errors that would have inflated revenue expectations by millions. She'd sent her corrections through proper channels, emailed Director Claudine Mercer twice, left a voicemail for CFO David Brennan. No one responded. And now, watching CEO Henrik Valerius stride to the podium, with the confident swagger of someone who'd never questioned his right to be there, Astrid felt the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. Henrik was 48, silver-haired, sharp-featured. He wore power like cologne, too much of it, overwhelming every room. He was Matthias Valerius's nephew, installed as CEO 5 years ago after the founder's unexpected death. Under his leadership, the company had grown aggressive, acquisitive, ruthless. "Good afternoon," Henrik began, his voice smooth and commanding. "Thank you all for being here. Today, we're going to address some unfortunate realities." The room fell silent. Henrik clicked to the first slide. Revenue projections. The numbers were catastrophically wrong, inflated by exactly the margins Astrid had warned about. "As you can see," Henrik continued, "our Q3 performance fell significantly short of expectations. We projected a 12% growth. We achieved -3. Murmurs erupted. Investors shifted uncomfortably. Board members exchanged worried glances. Astrid's heart began to race. Those were the wrong numbers, the ones she'd corrected. Why were they still? "This failure," Henrik said, his voice hardening, "stems from critical errors in our analytics division. Errors that cost this company nearly $40 million in misallocated resources. He paused for effect. Then his eyes locked onto Astrid. Errors committed by Astrid Lindberg. The room seemed to tilt. Every head turned toward her. 200 pairs of eyes. The air thickened with judgment. Astrid's mouth went dry. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair. Ms. Lindberg, Henrik continued, submitted falsified data models that grossly misrepresented our market position. Whether through incompetence or malice, I cannot say, but the result is the same. That's not... Astrid started to stand, but Director Claudine Mercer, seated 2 rows ahead, turned and shot her a withering look. "Don't make this worse," Claudine hissed. Henrik clicked to another slide. It showed email timestamps, data files, submission records, all with Astrid's name attached. "These documents," Henrik said, "were submitted under her credentials, approved under her authority. The responsibility is clear." Astrid's mind raced. Those weren't her final submissions. Those were the originals, the ones she'd corrected. Someone had switched them. Someone had... "In light of this catastrophic failure," Henrik announced, "Astrid Lindberg is terminated effective immediately." The words landed like a physical blow. Laughter, nervous, uncertain, rippled through the crowd. Some people looked away, embarrassed. Others pulled out phones, already texting, tweeting, documenting the spectacle. Henrik gestured to security guards stationed near the exits. "Ms. Lindberg, please collect your belongings and leave the premises. Security will escort you." Astrid stood slowly. Her legs felt numb. The folder in her hands, her notes, her corrections, her evidence, suddenly seemed absurdly small. She looked at Claudine, who was already scrolling through her phone, uninterested. She looked at David Brennan, the CFO who studied the ceiling. She looked at the junior analysts she'd mentored, trained, helped. They looked away. "Well," someone whispered behind her, loud enough to be heard, "always knew she was out of her depth." Another voice. 7 years and that's all she had to offer? Astrid walked down the aisle. Each step felt like walking through water. The security guards flanked her, hands on their belts, as if she might suddenly become dangerous. She passed Henrik at the podium. For a split second their eyes met. His gaze was cold, victorious, entitled, and in that moment, Astrid understood something she'd been too naive to see before. This wasn't about the numbers. This was about blame, about finding a scapegoat, about protecting the people who actually mattered, and she had never mattered. The auditorium doors closed behind her with a hollow thud. The hallway was empty, silent. The walls lined with photos of company milestones, product launches, award ceremonies. In one photo, she saw herself in the background, partially cropped out, barely visible behind a row of executives. Even in the memories, she was invisible. Astrid walked to her desk on the 14th floor, a small cubicle near the emergency exit. No window, no nameplate, just a computer, a dying plant, and a framed photo of her mother. She packed her belongings into a cardboard box. It took less than 5 minutes. As she carried the box toward the elevator, she passed junior employees whispering, watching. Faces she recognized, but whose names she'd never learned, because they'd never bothered to learn hers. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. And as the doors closed, sealing her off from the place she'd given 7 years of her life, Astrid Lindberg allowed herself one small, private moment of pain. Then she locked it away. Because pain, her mother once taught her, was a luxury you couldn't afford when you were invisible. Astrid's apartment was modest, a 1-bedroom in an aging building in Lincoln Park, 20 minutes by train from downtown. The rent was reasonable because the heating barely worked, and the neighbors upstairs had loud, frequent arguments in Polish. She set the cardboard box on the kitchen counter and stared at it. 7 years reduced to office supplies and a coffee mug with the company logo. The sky outside had turned grey, rain beginning to spatter against the window. Chicago in late October, cold and indifferent. Astrid filled the kettle, her movements mechanical. Tea. She would make tea. And then she would... what? Update her resume? Call her mother's friend who worked in HR at a non-profit? Cry? She didn't know. The kettle began to hiss. Then came the knock at the door. 3 sharp raps. Precise. Professional. Astrid froze. Who would? Nobody knew where she lived. She'd kept her address private, never invited co-workers, never... Another knock. She moved to the door, looked through the peephole. A man stood in the hallway, mid-50s, grey suit, immaculate posture. He held a leather briefcase and looked directly at the peephole. as if he knew she was watching. "Ms. Lindbergh," he said, his accent distinctly European, Swiss, perhaps German. "My name is Lucas Brenner. I represent the estate of Matthias Valerius. I need to speak with you. It's urgent." Astrid's hand hesitated on the doorknob. Matthias Valerius, the founder, dead for 5 years. "I don't understand," she said through the door. "I know," Lucas replied calmly. "Please, this concerns your future." Against her better judgment, or perhaps because she had nothing left to lose, Astrid opened the door. Lucas Brenner stepped inside with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to sensitive situations. He nodded politely, took in the small apartment with a single assessing glance, and waited for her invitation to sit. "Would you like tea?" Astrid asked automatically. "Thank you. No." They sat across from each other, the coffee table between them. Lucas placed his briefcase flat and opened it with 2 precise clicks. "Ms. Lindbergh," he began, "what I'm about to tell you will be difficult to hear. I ask that you listen completely before responding." Astrid nodded slowly, her heart beginning to hammer. Lucas withdrew a thick envelope sealed with red wax bearing an ornate V. 5 years ago, Matthias Valerius died of a heart attack in his office. The official cause was stress, overwork. His death was investigated, ruled natural, and the company transitioned to Henrik Valerius, his nephew. "I know all this," Astrid said quietly. "What you don't know," Lucas continued, meeting her eyes, "is that before his death, Matthias established a sealed trust, instructions that could only be opened under specific conditions. One of those conditions was triggered today." "What condition?" "Your termination from Valerius Group." Astrid blinked. "I don't understand." Lucas handed her the envelope. "Matthias Valerius was your father." The words didn't land at first. They hovered in the air. Impossible. Absurd. That's not possible," Astrid whispered. "My father was— Your mother, Helena Lindbergh, had a relationship with Matthias 29 years ago. You were born from that relationship. Matthias knew. He provided for you both, discreetly, through anonymous trust funds that paid for your education, your mother's medical care, everything." Astrid's hands trembled. The envelope felt impossibly heavy. "Why?" she breathed. "Why wouldn't he acknowledge you publicly?" Lucas's expression softened slightly. "Because the Valerius family is not what it appears. Matthias discovered, late in his life, that his own family had been using the company for illegal activities. Money laundering, bribery, fraud. He began gathering evidence, preparing to expose them. And then he died." Astrid finished. "Yes. You think they killed him?" Lucas paused. "I think Matthias believed they might, which is why he hid you, protected you, made sure you remained invisible until the time was right." Astrid tore open the envelope with shaking fingers. Inside, documents, dozens of them, a DNA test, certified and notarized, matching her to Matthias Valerius with 99.97% certainty. A last will and testament dated 3 months before his death. Letters, handwritten, in careful, elegant script. "My dearest Astrid, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and the time has come for you to know the truth. I am your father. I loved your mother deeply, but circumstances, my family, my responsibilities, prevented me from claiming you publicly. That cowardice is my greatest regret, but I never stopped watching over you, every school play, every graduation, every achievement. I was there, unseen, bursting with pride. The Valerius Group is yours. 74% of shares are held in trust under your name. The board does not know. Henrik does not know. I built this company with honest hands, but my family has corrupted it. You have the power to take it back. I know you are strong. You inherited your mother's grace and intelligence. Use it. Reclaim what is rightfully yours. Expose the corruption. Restore what I built. I only ask one thing. Do not let them make you cruel. You were raised with kindness. Keep that, even when you take your throne. With love and regret, your father, Matthias. Astrid read it 3 times. Then she looked up at Lucas, tears streaming down her face. 74%. Yes, controlling interest. The company is yours, Fräulein Valerius. That name, that surname she'd never carried. It sounded alien, powerful, terrifying. They'll fight this, Astrid said. Henrik, Claudine, all of them, they will lose. Lucas's voice was iron. The documentation is airtight. Matthias spent years ensuring it, and I have been preparing for this day since his death. He withdrew another document, a folder labeled Evidence of Corporate Fraud, Valerius Group 2019-2024. Everything you need is here, Lucas said. Financial records, email chains, offshore accounts. Matthias documented everything. When you take control of the company, you'll have the power to expose it all or use it as leverage. Astrid stared at the mountain of papers spread across her coffee table, her entire life rewritten in an afternoon. What do I do? She whispered. Lucas stood, straightening his suit jacket. You rest tonight. Tomorrow we begin. I'll arrange for proper legal representation, security, media strategy. In 72 hours, you'll walk into Valerius Group headquarters. Not as an employee, but as the owner. He moved toward the door, then paused. Your father believed the world would change when you took his place. He chose well, and then he was gone. Astrid sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by documents that proved she was someone else entirely. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows like applause. Astrid didn't sleep that night. She sat at her small kitchen table, papers spread in overlapping layers, reading by the light of a single lamp. Outside, Chicago's nighttime sounds filtered through thin walls, sirens, distant music, the hiss of tires on wet pavement. The letters from Matthias were numerous, 27 in total, written over the course of her lifetime but never sent, instead sealed in the trust, waiting, each one a window into a man she never knew. Dear Astrid, today you turned 7. I watched from across the street as your mother walked you to school. You were wearing a yellow raincoat, carrying a backpack too large for your small frame. You stopped to examine a snail on the sidewalk. I wanted to cross the street, to introduce myself, to be your father in more than just biology. But the family I was born into doesn't allow for such simple kindnesses. Perhaps someday you'll understand. The earliest letters were filled with longing, regret, and careful observation. Matthias had watched her grow from a distance, documenting milestones like a ghost at the edge of her life. But as the letters progressed chronologically, the tone shifted, from personal pain to growing alarm. Astrid, you're 16 now, preparing for college. Your mother tells me, through our intermediary, that you're considering business school. I'm proud, though I wish you'd choose something that makes you truly happy, not something you think will make you secure. I need to tell you about the company, about what I've discovered. When I founded Valerius Group 35 years ago, it was with honest intentions: manufacturing, innovation, creating jobs, building something meaningful. But my brother, Victor, had different ideas. He saw opportunity not in creation, but in exploitation. Shell companies, offshore accounts, relationships with people who solved problems with violence rather than ingenuity. I was naive, trusting. By the time I realized what was happening, Victor had embedded corruption so deeply into the company's infrastructure that removing it would collapse everything. Victor died 12 years ago, a car accident, but his son, Henrik, inherited his methods and perfected them. Astrid paused, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for another letter. This one was dated 3 months before Matthias's death. My daughter, I don't have much time. I can feel it. Whether illness or something more sinister, I cannot say. But I've made arrangements. Henrik knows I've been investigating. He's grown careful, paranoid. Board meetings have become battlegrounds. He's consolidating power, pushing out anyone loyal to me. I discovered something that changes everything. Henrik has been using company resources to facilitate international arms deals. Not directly. He's too clever for that. But through subsidiaries, partnerships with defense contractors in countries with minimal oversight, millions of dollars. Weapons flowing to conflicts I cannot even name. I gathered evidence, hired investigators, prepared to go to federal authorities, and then I hesitated, because exposing Henrik means destroying the company. Thousands of employees would lose their jobs. Investors would lose fortunes. The Valerius name would become synonymous with criminal enterprise. I couldn't do it. Perhaps I'm a coward. Perhaps I'm just old and tired. So instead, I'm leaving it to you. The company will be yours. The evidence will be yours. The choice will be yours. I pray you're stronger than I was. Astrid set the letter down, her chest tight with emotion. This man, her father, had carried this burden alone, had tried to protect her, even while his own family rotted from within. She turned to another folder. This one compiled by private investigators hired by Matthias. Financial records spanning 2 decades. Transaction logs showing money moving through elaborate networks of shell corporations. Payments to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, Panama. invoices for consulting services that corresponded with military purchases in conflict zones, email exchanges between Henrik and individuals with titles like Defense Liaison and Strategic Partner. One email, sent just 3 weeks before Matthias's death, made Astrid's blood run cold. "Henrik, your uncle is asking questions. He's hired forensic accountants. We need to move quickly. If he goes to the FBI, we all go down. We may need to consider permanent solutions." CM Claudine Mercer, the director who'd looked at Astrid with such contempt that morning, who'd helped orchestrate her public humiliation. She was part of it. All of it. Astrid stood pacing her small apartment, her mind racing. Matthias had suspected his death might not be natural. Had he been killed? Poisoned? Had Henrik and Claudine eliminated him before he could expose them? The evidence was circumstantial, suggestive but not conclusive. But the financial crimes? Those were documented, undeniable, prosecutable. Astrid returned to the table and picked up one final document. A letter addressed specifically to her, written just days before Matthias's death. "Astrid, by now you know everything, or enough. I don't expect you to forgive me for being an absent father. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope you understand why I did what I did. I was trying to protect you from a family that devours its own, from a legacy of corruption that would have crushed you if they'd known who you were. Your mother was the best person I ever knew. Kind, intelligent, fiercely independent. She refused my offers of marriage, of public acknowledgement. She said she wouldn't let me sacrifice my company for her, that she loved me enough to let me go. I regret listening to her. I should have fought harder, should have chosen differently. But that regret gave me you, and you, my dear girl, are my redemption. The company belongs to you now, not by conquest, but by inheritance, by right, by blood. What you do with it defines who you are. You can expose the corruption and watch it all burn. Or you can take control and rebuild from within. Or you can walk away entirely and let Henrik have his kingdom of lies. Whatever you choose, know this. I am proud of you. I have always been proud of you. You are invisible to them now. But you won't be for long. Be strong, my daughter. Be smarter than I was. With all my love." Dad Astrid's vision blurred with tears. She folded the letter carefully and held it against her chest. Outside, the first hints of dawn began to color the sky, grey fading to pale pink. And in that quiet moment, as the city began to wake, Astrid Lindberg felt something shift inside her. The hurt, the humiliation, the years of being overlooked and underestimated, all of it crystallized into something harder, sharper, purpose. Her father had given her a weapon, the truth, and a choice, what to do with it. Astrid looked at her reflection in the dark window. For the first time in her life, she saw someone powerful looking back. "Okay, Dad," she whispered. "Let's finish what you started." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Lucas Brenner proved to be more than just an attorney. He was a strategist, a fixer, someone who understood power and how to wield it precisely. He arrived at Astrid's apartment early the next morning with a team, a corporate attorney named Rachel Kim, a media consultant named James Porter, and a personal security specialist who introduced himself simply as Soren. They transformed her living room into a war room. "First," Lucas began, spreading documents across her coffee table, "we establish your identity legally and irrevocably. DNA results have been verified by 3 independent laboratories. Birth records, though initially sealed, have been authenticated. You are Astrid Valerius, biological daughter of Matthias Valerius. This is indisputable." Rachel Kim, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, chimed in. "The trust documentation is airtight. Matthias established it through a Swiss law firm specifically to prevent challenges. Henrik can contest, but he'll lose. It might take months in court, but you'll win." "We don't have months," Astrid said quietly. "Henrik will destroy evidence. Move assets, prepare defenses." Lucas nodded approvingly. "Correct, which is why we move fast. Monday morning, 2 days from now, you'll enter Valerius Group headquarters and present your claim to the board of directors. You'll have legal authority to call an emergency meeting. They must comply." James Porter, the media consultant, leaned forward. "And we need to control the narrative. The moment you walk through those doors, this becomes public. Heiress returns. Corporate scandal. It's explosive. We can either let the media define you or we define you first." "How?" Astrid asked. "We make you impossible to dismiss," James replied. "Professional, prepared, unquestionably legitimate. You're not walking in as a victim seeking revenge. You're walking in as an owner claiming what's rightfully yours." Over the next 2 days, they worked relentlessly. Rachel coached Astrid on corporate law, shareholder rights, board procedures, how to chair a meeting, how to table motions, how to remove executives for cause. James worked on messaging, sound bites, responses to anticipated questions. He ran her through mock interviews, teaching her to stay calm under hostile questioning. "They'll call you a fraud," James warned. "They'll question your competence, your motives. They'll try to make you emotional. Don't take the bait. Stay factual. Stay calm." "I can do calm," Astrid murmured, remembering 7 years of being invisible. "I've been practicing my whole life." Soren, the security specialist, was perhaps the most surprising addition. A former military officer, he explained that high-profile ownership battles sometimes turn dangerous. "Henrik Valerius has connections to some questionable people," Soren said bluntly. "I'm not saying he'll try something physical, but we take precautions. I'll accompany you to headquarters. After you take control, we'll assess ongoing security needs." But beyond the legal and strategic preparation, something else was happening to Astrid. She was changing. On Saturday afternoon, Rachel took her shopping. Not to the discount stores where Astrid usually browsed, but to boutiques in the Gold Coast where she'd never dared enter. "You're a major shareholder now," Rachel said firmly. "You dress like one. Tailored suits, Italian leather shoes, a watch that cost more than Astrid's monthly rent." At first, Astrid felt like she was wearing a costume. But gradually, as she saw herself in the fitting room mirrors, she began to recognize someone new. Someone who looked like she belonged in boardrooms. Someone people would remember. That evening, alone in her apartment after the team had left, Astrid stood before her bathroom mirror. She thought of her mother. Helena had died 4 years ago. Cancer. Quick and merciless. In those final weeks, drugged with morphine, she'd said strange things. "Your father loved you," Helena had whispered once. He couldn't say it, but he did. Astrid had assumed her mother was confused. Now she understood. "Mom," she whispered to the mirror, "I wish you were here. I don't know if I can do this." But even as she said it, she knew her mother's answer. Could almost hear Helena's voice. "Yes, you can, because you're my daughter. And we survive." Astrid closed her eyes. She thought of every moment of invisibility. Every time her name was forgotten, her work dismissed, her presence erased, every slight, every condescending comment, every assumption that she wasn't worth noticing. And she thought of Henrik's face at that podium, pointing at her with such casual cruelty. The humiliation had been designed to destroy her. Instead, it had forged her. Sunday night, Astrid laid out her clothes for the next morning. Charcoal grey suit, white blouse, black heels, simple jewelry. Hair down, professional. She reviewed her notes one final time. The trust documents, the evidence of fraud, the shareholder bylaws. Everything she needed to take control. At midnight, she tried to sleep but couldn't. Her mind raced with possibilities, scenarios, fears. What if she failed? What if Henrik found a legal loophole? What if the board rejected her claim? But beneath the fear was something stronger. Determination. Because this wasn't just about corporate control or personal vindication. This was about honoring a father she never knew. About exposing corruption. About protecting the thousands of employees who had no idea their company was built on lies. And yes, if she was honest, it was also about making Henrik Valerius understand what it felt like to fall. At 4 a.m., Astrid finally slept and dreamed of her father, watching from across the street, finally smiling. Monday morning arrived cold and bright. Astrid stood outside the Valerius Group headquarters at 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the building officially opened. The skyscraper rose 43 stories above downtown Chicago, glass and steel reflecting the pale autumn sun. She'd been here 1,000 times, but never like this. Lucas stood to her right, briefcase in hand. Soren flanked her left, his presence subtle but unmistakable. Rachel waited in a car nearby, ready to provide legal support if needed. "Ready?" Lucas asked quietly. Astrid nodded. They walked through the revolving doors. The lobby was vast, marble and chrome, with the Valerius logo emblazoned across the far wall in brushed metal. Security guards staffed the desk, checking employee badges. The guard who usually waved Astrid through without looking up, she'd never learned his name, now glanced at her with confusion. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone suggesting she didn't belong. Astrid approached the desk, her heels clicking on marble. She placed her identification on the counter. Not her old employee badge, but her driver's license. "My name is Astrid Valerius," she said clearly. I'm here to convene an emergency meeting of the board of directors. The guard blinked. I'm sorry, what? Lucas stepped forward, producing a legal document sealed with notarization. Ms. Valerius is the majority shareholder of this company. Under Article 7 of the corporate bylaws, she has the authority to call an emergency board meeting with 12 hours' notice. This document provides that notice. The guard stared at the papers as if they were written in ancient hieroglyphics. I need to call upstairs, he stammered. Please do, Astrid said calmly. The guard picked up his phone, his eyes darting between Astrid and the documents. His conversation was hushed, urgent. Astrid caught fragments. Says she's a Valerius, majority shareholder, legal documents. Within 3 minutes, the elevator doors opened. Claudine Mercer strode out, immaculate as always in a black pantsuit, her expression somewhere between confusion and irritation. Astrid! Claudine's voice dripped with disdain. What is this? You were terminated. You can't just... Director Mercer, Lucas interrupted smoothly. I'm Lucas Brenner, attorney representing Ms. Astrid Valerius. I suggest you review these documents immediately. He handed Claudine a folder. Claudine opened it, her eyes scanning quickly. Astrid watched the exact moment comprehension struck. Claudine's face went pale, her jaw tightening. This is impossible, Claudine whispered. It's verified and notarized, Lucas replied. Ms. Valerius owns 74% of company shares through a trust established by Matthias Valerius. The documentation is legally binding. She has the authority to call this meeting, and the board is required to attend. Claudine looked up at Astrid, and for the first time in 7 years, she truly saw her. Not as the invisible analyst, not as the scapegoat, as a threat. Henrik needs to see this, Claudine said tightly. He will, Astrid replied evenly. At the board meeting, please notify all directors. We convene in the executive conference room in 1 hour. You can't just... Article 7, Section 4, Rachel Kim said, appearing from the entrance. Emergency meetings may be called by any shareholder controlling more than 50% of voting shares. Ms. Valerius controls 74%. The board must convene within 12 hours of notice. We're being generous with 1 hour. Claudine's hand shook slightly as she held the documents. Around them, early arriving employees had begun to notice the commotion. Whispers spread. Phones emerged, recording. Fine, Claudine said finally, her voice brittle. 1 hour. She turned sharply and walked back to the elevator. As the doors closed, Astrid caught a glimpse of Claudine frantically dialing her phone, warning Henrik. Well, Lucas said mildly. That went smoothly. The next hour was surreal. Astrid was escorted to a private office on the 42nd floor, an executive suite left vacant after a vice president's retirement. Lucas used it as a staging area, reviewing final details. Outside, the building buzzed with confusion. News spread through email chains and Slack channels. The analyst they'd fired 3 days ago was back, claiming to be the owner. It sounded like fiction. At 8:55 a.m., Astrid walked into the executive conference room. The space was imposing. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A massive oak table surrounded by leather chairs. The walls lined with portraits of company founders, Matthias Valerius's stern face among them. 8 board members were already seated. Henrik sat at the head of the table, his expression thunderous. Claudine beside him, pale and tense. The CFO, the COO, 3 independent directors, and 2 investor representatives, all eyes locked on Astrid. She walked to the opposite end of the table, traditionally the founder's seat, and remained standing. Soren positioned himself near the door. Lucas and Rachel flanked Astrid. This is absurd, Henrik said immediately. Astrid, I don't know what scheme you're attempting, but... Mr. Valerius, Rachel interrupted crisply. I'm Rachel Kim, legal counsel for Ms. Astrid Valerius. This meeting has been properly convened under corporate bylaws. I suggest you review the documentation before making accusations. She placed folders in front of each board member. The room fell silent as they read. Astrid watched their faces. Confusion giving way to shock. Disbelief to calculation. One of the independent directors, an older man named Gerald Hutchins, looked up first. The DNA evidence is authenticated by 3 independent laboratories, Lucas confirmed, and verified by the trust administrator in Zurich. But Matthias never mentioned. Gerald trailed off, looking at Henrik. Henrik's face had gone from furious to very, very still, the kind of stillness that suggested a predator reassessing its prey. Even if this is true, Henrik said slowly, This woman has zero experience running a company. She was an analyst, a failed one. The board would never— The board, Astrid said quietly, speaking for the first time, doesn't have a choice. Every head turned toward her. She met Henrik's eyes across the table. I own 74% of this company. I don't need the board's approval to take control. I have it by right. This meeting is a courtesy, an opportunity for you to understand what happens next. And what happens next? Henrik's voice was dangerously soft. Astrid smiled slightly. You're fired. The room erupted. The chaos lasted exactly 12 seconds before Rachel Kim's voice cut through. Order, please. Henrik shot to his feet. You can't fire me. I'm the CEO. The board appointed me. You can't just— Ms. Valerius, Rachel said calmly, addressing the board, owns 74% of voting shares. Under the corporate charter, she has the authority to remove any executive officer, including the CEO, with or without cause. Additionally, as majority shareholder, she can restructure the board itself. One of the investor representatives, a woman named Patricia Okafor, raised her hand. I'd like to hear Ms. Valerius's plans before we proceed. Astrid nodded. Thank you, Ms. Okafor. She opened her own folder, a different one, thicker, and withdrew a document. For the past 3 months, Astrid began, her voice steady, I've been analyzing financial irregularities in company operations. Initially, I thought they were errors, data anomalies, but when I tried to report them, my concerns were ignored. She looked directly at Claudine, or actively suppressed. Claudine's face hardened. That's not— Please don't interrupt, Astrid said softly. The directness of it, the quiet authority, silenced the room. Astrid continued. On Friday I was fired for data falsification, accused of causing $40 million in losses, but the files presented as evidence were not my final submissions. They were preliminary drafts. Someone replaced my corrected reports with the originals. She slid documents across the table, email timestamps, file version histories, access logs. These records show that Director Mercer accessed my files 36 hours before the shareholder meeting. She replaced my corrected projections with the flawed versions. Then she authorized their presentation under my credentials. Claudine went very pale. I was reviewing them. I must have accidentally— Nothing about this was accidental, Astrid interrupted, because the errors you wanted to preserve weren't errors at all. They were deliberate falsifications designed to hide significant financial misconduct. She distributed another set of documents. These were more damning. Offshore account statements, transaction records, email chains between Henrik and shell companies. Over the past 4 years, Astrid said, approximately $230 million have been moved through the company's subsidiary networks to offshore accounts. On paper, these transactions are labeled as consulting fees, strategic partnerships, and international development costs. She paused, letting the board absorb the numbers. In reality, these funds have been used to facilitate arms deals in conflict regions, to bribe foreign officials, to launder money for organizations operating in legal gray zones. Gerald Hutchins looked like he might be sick. Henrik, please tell me this isn't true. Henrik's expression was unreadable. These are standard international business practices. Every global company— No, Astrid said firmly. They're crimes. Federal crimes. And my father, Matthias Valerius, spent the last year of his life documenting them. She placed the final folder on the table. This one marked in red, Evidence compiled by Matthias Valerius, 2019-2020. My father discovered what you were doing, Astrid said, looking at Henrik. He hired investigators, collected proof. He was preparing to go to federal authorities. And then he died, Patricia Okafor said slowly. Conveniently, Henrik's jaw clenched. Are you accusing me of— I'm stating facts, Astrid interrupted. Matthias Valerius died of a sudden heart attack 3 days after emailing Claudine Mercer about forensic auditors. The coroner ruled it natural causes, but my father was a healthy man. No history of heart disease, no risk factors. She let that hang in the air. Whether his death was natural or not, I can't prove. But I can prove the corruption. And I can prove that you, Henrik, and you, Claudine, have been systematically stealing from this company and endangering its legal standing. The room was deathly silent. Patricia Okafor spoke first. What do you want, Ms. Valerius? I want Henrik Valerius removed as CEO, effective immediately. I want Claudine Mercer removed as director. I want a full forensic audit of the last 5 years. and I want cooperation with federal authorities. You'll destroy the company, Henrik said, his voice cold. The lawsuits, the investigations, we'll lose everything. Maybe, Astrid acknowledged. Or maybe we survive because we chose honesty. Either way, the corruption ends today. Henrik stood slowly. For a moment, Astrid thought he might lunge across the table. Soren shifted position near the door, ready. But Henrik just smiled, a bitter, dangerous smile. You have no idea what you're doing, he said quietly. This company eats people like you alive. You're a little girl playing dress-up. You won't last a month. We'll see, Astrid replied evenly. Henrik grabbed his jacket and walked toward the door. As he passed Astrid, he stopped. Your father was weak, he whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. That's why He caught himself, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. Astrid's blood ran cold. Why you what, Henrik? Henrik smiled again and walked out. Claudine tried to follow, but Rachel Kim stepped in front of her. Director Mercer, you're required to surrender all company property. Phone, laptop, access badges. Security will escort you. Claudine's composure finally cracked. You self-righteous little... Be careful, Astrid said softly. Everything you say right now can be used in federal court. Claudine's mouth snapped shut. She threw her phone on the table and stalked out, security guards trailing behind. The remaining board members sat in stunned silence. Finally, Gerald Hutchins spoke. Ms. Valerius, I've been on this board for 12 years. I had no knowledge of any illegal activity. If I had known... I believe you, Astrid said gently. My father's notes indicate that the corruption was carefully compartmentalized. Only Henrik and a few key conspirators knew the full scope. Patricia Okafor leaned forward. What happens now? Astrid took a breath. Now we clean house. Full audit. Cooperation with authorities. Anyone involved in illegal activity will be terminated and prosecuted. Anyone who was unaware will be protected. We'll restructure, become transparent, rebuild trust. And you'll run the company? Gerald asked skeptically. Yes, you have no executive experience. True, Astrid acknowledged, but I have something more important. I know this company. I've worked here for 7 years. I've seen the problems, the inefficiencies, the places where corruption took root, and I'm not beholden to the people who caused it. She looked around the table. My father built something good. Henrik corrupted it. I'm going to restore it. You can help me or resign. Your choice. The board members exchanged glances. One by one, they nodded. All right, Patricia said finally. Let's get to work. Outside the conference room, employees had gathered in hushed clusters. News spread through the building like wildfire. Henrik Valerius, escorted by security, carrying a banker's box of personal items. Claudine Mercer, face streaked with angry tears, being walked to the parking garage. And Astrid Valerius, a name nobody had heard before today, now sitting in the CEO's office. In the employee cafeteria, the junior analyst who'd whispered about Astrid being out of her depth stared at his phone, reading the breaking news alert. Shock succession at Valerius Group. Hidden heiress takes control. He looked at his colleague. Did we just watch a corporate coup? His colleague shook her head slowly. I think we watched someone take back what was always theirs. The first week was brutal. Astrid moved into Matthias's old office, untouched since his death, preserved like a museum. She replaced nothing at first, just sat in his chair behind his desk, trying to feel connected to the father she never knew. The walls were lined with books, business theory, philosophy, history. A photo on the credenza showed young Matthias shaking hands with a governor, back when the company was just starting. No family photos, Astrid noted. He'd kept that part of his life hidden, even here. She worked 18-hour days. The forensic audit began immediately. Ernst & Young sent a team of 12 accountants who descended on the financial records like archaeologists excavating a crime scene. What they found was worse than Astrid had imagined. Henrik had been siphoning money for nearly a decade. Shell companies in Panama, the Caymans, Luxembourg, fake invoices for services never rendered, bribes disguised as charitable donations. The total estimated loss, $420 million. Rachel Kim worked with federal prosecutors. The FBI opened an investigation. Henrik lawyered up immediately, denying everything, claiming Astrid had fabricated evidence. But Matthias's documentation was meticulous, irrefutable. Meanwhile, Astrid had to actually run the company. She appointed Gerald Hutchins as interim CFO. He was clean, the audit confirmed, just oblivious. She brought in Patricia Okafor as COO. Together they began restructuring. Department by department, Astrid interviewed key personnel. She discovered dozens of employees like her, competent, hard-working, but overlooked. People who'd been kept in subordinate roles because they weren't part of the right networks, didn't have the right connections. Marcus Chen, a supply chain analyst who'd been flagging inventory discrepancies for years, only to be ignored, promoted to Senior Director of Operations. Yolanda Reeves, an HR specialist who documented harassment complaints that were buried by Claudine, promoted to VP of Human Resources. Thomas Mbai, a junior accountant who'd tried to report suspicious transactions and was nearly fired for it, promoted to Director of Financial Compliance. Astrid didn't just promote people, she listened to them. What would you fix if you had authority? She asked each person, and then she gave them the authority to fix it. The culture began to shift. Meetings that used to be dominated by senior executives' voices now included input from junior staff. Ideas that had been dismissed for years were suddenly implemented. The company's stock price dropped initially. Scandal and uncertainty spooked investors. But within 3 weeks, as the extent of the restructuring became clear, it stabilized. Analysts began to notice something unusual. Valerius Group was becoming transparent. Financial reports were detailed, comprehensive, honest. When the audit revealed losses, Astrid announced them publicly and explained the recovery plan. "We're not hiding anymore," she told investors during an emergency shareholder call. "We're fixing what was broken. It'll take time, but we'll emerge stronger." 1 month after taking control, Astrid held her first all-company meeting. The same auditorium where she'd been fired, the same stage where Henrik had destroyed her. Now every seat was filled. Employees packed the room, standing along the walls, crowding the doorways. They wanted to see the woman who'd taken down Henrik Valerius. Astrid walked onto the stage. No notes, no PowerPoint, just herself. The room fell silent. 6 weeks ago, she began, I stood in this room as Henrik Valerius fired me in front of all of you. He accused me of incompetence, of costing the company millions, of being worthless. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some of you laughed, Astrid continued, her voice gentle but firm. Some of you looked away. Some of you felt sorry for me, but none of you questioned whether it was true. She paused, letting that settle. I don't blame you. In corporate culture, we're taught to trust authority, to assume that people in power know what they're doing, to believe that if someone is fired, they probably deserved it. But authority isn't the same as truth, and power doesn't equal competence. Henrik Valerius was powerful. He was also a criminal. The room was absolutely silent now. Over the next several months, Astrid continued, you're going to hear a lot about what happened here. Federal investigations, legal proceedings, probably some very ugly headlines. I want you to hear it from me first. This company was being used for illegal activity, money laundering, bribery, fraud, not by most of you, not by the people doing the actual work, but by a small group at the top who thought they were untouchable. My father, Matthias Valerius, discovered this. He tried to stop it, and I believe his resistance cost him his life. Gasps echoed through the room. I can't prove that, Astrid said quickly. The authorities are investigating, but I can prove the corruption, and I can promise you this. It ends now. She took a breath. We're going to rebuild this company the right way. Transparently. Ethically. It won't be easy. We'll lose some contracts. Some clients won't want to work with us anymore. We'll have to prove ourselves all over again. But we'll do it honestly. And when we succeed, and we will succeed, it'll be because we earned it. She looked out at the sea of faces. To those of you who've been overlooked, ignored, dismissed, I see you now. Your ideas matter. Your work matters. You matter. To those of you who participated in the old culture, you have a choice. Change with us, or leave. There's no middle ground. And to those of you who are wondering if I'm qualified to run this company, she smiled slightly. I'm probably not. I'm learning. I'll make mistakes. But I promise you this. I will never lie to you. I will never ask you to do something illegal or unethical. And I will never ever humiliate someone just because I have the power to do it. The applause started slowly. One person, then another. Then the entire room, rising to their feet. Astrid stood on the stage, tears threatening, and felt something she'd never felt before. Belonging. That evening, Astrid visited 2 graves. The first was her mother's, a modest headstone in a cemetery in suburban Chicago. She knelt in the grass, tracing Helena's name with her fingers. I met him, Mum, she whispered. Well, not really, but I know him now. through his letters, through what he built. You were right. He did love me. He just didn't know how to show it. The wind rustled through nearby trees. I'm running his company now, can you believe that? Me, the girl who used to hide in the library during lunch because she didn't have friends. She smiled through tears. I think I'm good at it. I think this is what I was supposed to do. She stayed until sunset, talking to her mother about everything and nothing. The second grave was in a different cemetery, a more expensive one, with marble monuments and manicured lawns. Matthias Valerius's headstone was simple despite his wealth, just his name and dates. Astrid placed her hand on the cold marble. Hi, Dad, she said softly. I'm sorry we never met. I'm sorry you thought you had to hide me. I wish things had been different. But I understand why you did what you did, and I'm going to honor it. I'm going to fix what Henrik broke. I'm going to make this company something you'd be proud of. She pulled out one of his letters, her favorite, and read it aloud in the fading light. When she finished, she folded it carefully and placed it in her jacket pocket, close to her heart. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for watching over me, for believing I could do this. I won't let you down. The sun had fully set now, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Astrid stood, wiped her eyes, and walked back to her car, where Lucas was waiting, patient as always. Ready? He asked. Astrid nodded. Let's go home. 3 months later, the Valerius Group headquarters gleamed in morning sunlight, the company logo reflecting pride instead of shame. Inside, the transformation was complete. Henrik Valerius had been indicted on 17 federal charges. His trial was scheduled for next spring. Claudine Mercer had taken a plea deal, agreeing to testify in exchange for reduced sentencing. The company had settled with federal regulators, paying substantial fines but avoiding criminal charges for the organization itself. The board had been restructured, independent oversight established. Transparency became policy, not just promise. And the company was profitable again, not through corruption or shortcuts, but through innovation, through products that worked, through employees who were empowered rather than exploited. Astrid walked through the main corridor on the executive floor, the same hallway where security had escorted her out 3 months ago. Employees nodded respectfully as she passed. Some smiled. A few said good morning. She knew most of their names now. Her office, Matthias's office, had been updated but not erased. His books remained, his desk stayed, but she'd added her own touches. A photo of her mother, a plant that actually thrived, a framed copy of one of his letters. Her assistant, a young woman named Priya, who Astrid had promoted from the mailroom after noticing her organizational brilliance, appeared in the doorway. Morning meeting in 10 minutes, Priya said. Full executive team. Thank you, Priya. Astrid gathered her materials and walked to the executive conference room, the same room where she'd confronted Henrik, where she'd claimed her inheritance, where everything had changed. Now it was just her workspace. The executive team filed in. Gerald, Patricia, Yolanda, Marcus, Thomas. Competent people doing good work. They discussed Q4 projections, product launches, sustainability initiatives, normal business, ethical business. As the meeting concluded, Patricia lingered behind. You know, Patricia said quietly, when you first walked in here 3 months ago, I thought you'd fail. I didn't say it, but I thought it. Astrid nodded. A lot of people did. I was wrong, Patricia continued. You're the best CEO this company's had in 20 years, maybe ever. I had good teachers, Astrid replied, thinking of Lucas, of Rachel, of her mother, of Matthias's letters. Patricia smiled. Still, well done. After Patricia left, Astrid stood alone in the conference room. She walked to the window looking out over Chicago, the city sprawling below, full of invisible people doing invisible work, unnoticed and underestimated. She thought about that day in the auditorium, Henrik's voice, the laughter, the humiliation, and she thought about what came after, the truth, the inheritance, the choice. She hadn't chosen revenge, not really. She'd chosen justice. There was a difference. Revenge would have been destroying Henrik's life for the sake of it. Justice was simply revealing what he'd already done to himself. Her phone buzzed. A text from Lucas. Saw the quarterly report. Your father would be proud. Astrid smiled and replied, Thank you for everything. She pocketed her phone and walked back toward her office. As she passed through the main workspace, she noticed something. People working, collaborating, laughing. The tension that used to permeate this building had lifted. In its place, something lighter, something healthier, purpose without fear. That evening, Astrid left the office at 6 o'clock, a reasonable hour for once. As she walked through the lobby, she passed the security desk. The guard, the same one who hadn't recognized her that first day, looked up. "Good night, Miss Valerius," he said respectfully. "Good night, Marcus," she replied, having finally learned his name. "See you tomorrow." She stepped out into the Chicago evening, the city alive with lights and noise and possibility, and she thought about something her mother used to say. The strongest people aren't the loudest. They're the ones who survive quietly, and then, when the moment comes, stand up. Astrid had survived quietly for 29 years, and then she stood up, not with violence or cruelty, but with truth. She walked to the train station, joining the stream of commuters heading home, anonymous among thousands, but not invisible anymore, never invisible again. As she boarded the train, a young woman in business casual accidentally bumped into her. "Sorry," the woman muttered, barely looking up. Astrid smiled. "No problem." She found a seat and watched the city slide past the windows. Somewhere in this city, there were others like she had been. Overlooked, dismissed, considered unimportant, but they weren't. None of them were. And someday, when their moment came, they would stand up too. Astrid closed her eyes and whispered the words that had become her mantra: "Never underestimate those you don't see."